So I teach English at Lake Travis. I preached in a couple other places in between now and then. Let's talk about Luke 21, okay? So if you don't have one of these, you sort of kind of need one, because that's how the class is going to be structured. And you need a Bible as well. Am I not speaking in it right?
Yeah. You need to talk into the microphone or nobody's going to be able to hear you.
I gotcha.
We're all old and hard of hearing.
That's on me. All right. My Bible's on my phone. I promise I'm not texting anyone. Okay, so the way it's going to work, I'm going to just give you the theological overview myself. You do not have to read that portion. You can if you want to. But the rest of it, we're going to read each section by section, and then I'm going to pause and allow y'all just to look over the notes that I have in here, because these are notes that are pulled from different commentaries and different studies. Every once in a while I shed my own thought in there, but most of the time it's very fancy people with very fancy degrees saying very smart things. And I'm just going to pause, and y'all are going to lead the discussion, which I know I'm here to teach Bible class, but you're going to do my job for me. And what I'd like y'all to think about as we read and as you look over these notes, there's a couple different options. These aren't all of them. But you might find something in there that is confusing, and you might ask a clarifying question. What the heck does this mean? You might find something in there that sort of sparks an insight, and I would love for you to share that with us, or something that can begin a conversation. And my promise to you is that I will make sure that you never look stupid if you choose to say something. I will make sure that you don't look stupid. So that's how class is going to work. Let me talk about the overview. The Gospel of Luke is my favorite gospel. Preached through this a couple times. It was very nifty to pick a text out of here because I've got all these fancy notes. I don't have that for every other thing, but these are notes that I've used in the past years. We are near the end of the Gospel of Luke, near the end of Jesus' journey. Most of Jesus' life is spent outside of Jerusalem, and the Gospel of Luke sort of has this narrative of Jesus starting in the countryside and sort of moving closer and closer and closer to Jerusalem, which is, of course, where he dies, where the church sort of begins. And then Acts, which is the second part of Luke, also written by Luke, is the movement away from Jerusalem. All right, so Luke writes sort of this sort of narrative and paints a picture of Jesus moving toward Jerusalem, has this big climax there in Jerusalem, and then Acts, the second part, moves away. We are sort of in that middle part, all right? Jesus is finally at Jerusalem. And if we take a broad bird's eye view of this text, or of the gospel really, this is where everything that Jesus has said and done sort of gets encapsulated and wrapped up in a lot of ways. The chapter prior to 21, which would be 20, and I'm good at math, so I know that's true for sure, is a bunch of teaching. If you have your Bible open, you can look at chapter 20. You just see a lot of people coming to question Jesus and Jesus giving some answers. And what Luke loves to do is to pair teaching with stories and examples and other things that sort of go along with them and follow from them. So a reader going through this would sort of expect to see a lot of teaching, and then in chapter 21, and there weren't chapters in the original Gospels, but also the people that made the chapters weren't dumb either. So the very next set of things that we find are not teachings. They're stories, or in this case, a little bit of story and a little bit of prophetic text that goes along with it. So the first thing we need to do is read actually the last part of 20, and if my app will cooperate. I'm going to read it since I'm the only one with a microphone, unless someone wants to run up here and do it. Any takers? Michael, you need to get your steps in? Always. All right. So the last part of 20, starting at 45, you see those little subheadings that somebody with some sense put in there. Sometimes they don't have sense. Sometimes I'm like, why'd you put a subheading here? But this time it's okay. Starting at verse 45, while all the people were listening, Jesus said to his disciples, beware the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely. All right, so that sort of encapsulates in some ways a whole bunch of antagonistic questioning that Jesus is receiving at the hands of some of these scribe type people. And then when we get to chapter 21, which for the most part is Jesus talking about the destruction of the temple, it's that sort of prophetic Da Vinci Code rambling sort of thing that we might be familiar with. It begins not with that, but with a story. So we're going to read verses 1 through 4, and then I'm going to pause, and we're going to have an uncomfortable silence until someone in the audience is willing to share a question, a comment, an insight, or anything else that can get us having a discussion. So, starting in verse 1, chapter 21, as Jesus looked up, he saw the rich putting their gifts into the temple treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 very small copper coins. Truly, I tell you, he said, this poor widow has put in more than all the others. All these people gave their gifts out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on. So take a look at those notes there, just that first section, 1 through 4. Tell me what pops in your head. Good. Yes. Feels odd. Yes. Which is a really important observation. Because on the one hand, we might say, well, Luke's just shoving things in the order that they came. And that's true to an extent. But Luke also carefully puts things in places on purpose. And so if we assume he has a purpose, then we need to think, what is the connection between this little story about the widow and her mites, very famous story, and everything that we're about to hear about the temple being brought down and all these sorts of things. So we might first ask, what does it relate to the thing that we just read at the end of chapter 20? Mm-hmm. It says they devour widows' homes, which is actually language borrowed from the prophets. Like you'd hear something like this a lot in Micah or Isaiah. I don't think that there's really strong knowledge to say exactly how that worked, at least not to my knowledge. We can probably speculate a lot, but if we're assuming Jesus is being true here, then there's probably some form of exploitation happening, some reliance on the poor to fund things, to support things that's out of proportion with the rest of the community. Well, I think you're onto it. That's maybe the language needs to be shifted there, but they're 2 models, not necessarily of good faithfulness. 2 models of sort of what it looks like to be a person in good religious standing within the community, because these people were, right? And that would be seen as somebody who's doing the right thing. And I think we would all prefer, at least, if the scribes and the Pharisees and the rich that they're talking about here, At least they're giving something. I think we'd prefer that to nothing. At least it's not the Scrooge McDuck model. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. There's a story in Acts. I see you. There's a story in Acts along a similar vein. Does anybody remember what that story is? Two fun names, Ananias and Sapphira. Yeah. And it seems completely unfair because they gave most of what they had, but were still sort of punished by the divine in some way. So it's unclear exactly what the expectation in the early community is, but it's clear that whatever it might be, it's all or nothing here. And there's a sort of expectation that you don't hold back. Please. Mm. Mm. Yeah, I think you're absolutely on to that sort of foundation theological understanding of the early church, is that there's perhaps an extreme ask, but faith says, I'm going to rely on Jesus. I'm going to assume that God is going to take care of me, and so I am free to give of my resources and free from some of these other things. Hey, y'all. So just to wrap up this section, it's really important that we had read that final bit from 20, because this story on its own just sort of, other than painting this widow in a heroic light, doesn't make a lot of sense. But if we keep in mind that he had just said something about a sort of exploitive system, vague to us, I'm sure the original audiences understood it much better than we do. But there's some sort of exploitation going on here. The scribes are devouring widows' homes. And then we get this story comparing the rich and the poor, probably more than likely a widow, just not necessarily being said, nope, she called her a widow, you're right. So when we get those things, we are sort of meant to understand that this is a case in point example of what's going on, and whether we really understand the economics of church tithing in the first century Judaism, sort of beyond the point. The point is that they're saying, hey, here's a really bad systemic reality going on, and hey, there it is right there. Teaching and example. Now, we have, yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, his mom was a widow. In all likelihood, Jesus' mom was a widow. Mary, by this point, would have been a widow. Yeah. I can't, but can you? I'll just repeat it. I'll just repeat the question. Yeah, that'll work. Okay. Let's read the next section, verse 5 through 24. Get your tinfoil hats out. All right, here we go. How long do I have? 10, 15. We're not going to make it through this. That's fine. We'll get as far as we can. All right. Some of his disciples were remarking about how the temple was adorned with beautiful stones and with gifts dedicated to God. But Jesus said, "As for what you see here, the time will come when not one stone will be left on another. Every one of them will be thrown down." "Teacher," they asked, "when will these things happen, and what will be the sign that they are about to take place?" He replied, "Watch out that you are not deceived. For many will come in my name, claiming I am he, and the time is near. Do not follow them. When you hear of wars and uprisings, do not be frightened. These things must happen first, but the end will not come right away." Then he said to them, "Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, famines, and pestilences in various places, and fearful events and great signs from heaven. But before all this, they will seize you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and put you in prison, and you will be brought before kings and governors, and on account of my name. And so you will bear testimony to me. But make up your mind not to worry beforehand how you will defend yourselves, for I will give you words and wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents, brothers and sisters, relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. Everyone will hate you because of me, but not a hair on your head will perish. Stand firm, and you will win life. When you see Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, you will know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those in the city get out, and let those in the country not enter the city. For this is the time of punishment and fulfillment of all that has been written. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. There will be great distress in the land and wrath against the people. They will fall by the sword and will be taken as prisoners to all the nations. Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled." All right, so we have concluded a section concerning Jerusalem itself. Y'all did such a great job on that first 4 verses. I have such faith in you to do a similarly great job these next 20 verses. Take a look, give a pause. It's okay to have awkward silence. My record of awkward silences in class, by the way, is 3 minutes and 42 seconds. There are some very shy freshmen that I teach who do not like to talk. Yes.
Does that not sound an awful lot like what's going on right now
Where?
in Israel?
Oh, in Israel. Sure. Yeah. It's an interesting part of things like this. They sort of work like tarot cards or psychics, that it's sort of so general that we can map a lot of things, and a lot of things have been mapped on to it. And that impulse is actually okay, because at any point nations are going to fall, right? As long as we sort of figure out, okay, when we're in this situation, what is the point of a text like this for us? You know? Yes, but please elaborate. What does that mean or look like? Phoebe said, put your faith in God.
When there's chaos and crisis all around, that we should be leaning on our rock of Jesus instead of the things that man do.
Yeah. Why? Okay. That's really true, and the point that I hope to land on. But we wouldn't be talking about it if there weren't 1,000 other impulses that make us not want to do that. So none of us have been quite in this sort of apocalyptic crisis before, in terms of like wars and things like that. But we've had our own sorts of things. And what are those impulses that make us look for things other than faithfulness to God in these situations? What drives people to not be faithful in times of crisis?
I think it's a desire to be in control.
Ooh, I like this. Go on.
Excuse me?
Go on.
So we sometimes dislike letting go and allowing God to try to control our destiny. We feel that we have to be in charge all the time, right? One of the criticisms I got, it was just recently, I referee ice hockey, right?
Oh, okay.
And I became the vice president of our association. And I was talking to the president, and I said, well, tell me what the other referees, think about me, say about me, if I'm going to be the vice president. And he said, well, I've heard just a few times that you don't accept criticism. I said, okay, that may or may not be true. But the point being is that we want to be in charge. We want to be in control. We don't like when other people tell us what to do or how to do something. And I think it's same, as us being Christians, right? We want to be our own God. We want to, stay in charge, and we don't want to let go.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's it's my challenges sometimes, right? But there's a reward when we do let go and let God take over.
Yeah. Those are such good points because we have here basically a reflection of the early Christian community. Jesus is saying this, 30, 31, 32, 34, I don't know, something around that time. But the temple doesn't fall until 70, and Luke doesn't write this gospel until 80 or 90. So these events have already happened. And it's sort of reflective of a community that has no control, right? Has experienced these things and is continuing to experience these things. And I love that because the impulse is to get control, to be in power, not just to be safe and fine, but to be great and have that control. And there is no control here. Jesus is saying it is out of your control. You're gonna be right. I love this part because he's like, hey, I'm gonna give you the words and no one can contradict you, but they're still gonna punish you. You're gonna be right, but you're also gonna be dead. What else? We can continue that conversation, or we can look through the rest of this. Anything spark some thoughts? Michael's ready to give a microphone to whoever. There's a prompt for a certain Munger individual.
I know she asked something.
Well, what does it mean to be a good Israelite, right? Because Jesus has cleansed the temple in the previous passage and said, all of you who are in charge, you're using the temple, it's your place of safety after you rob everyone else. It's your den of robbers, right? It's the place that you go and say, the temple of the Lord, just like in the prophets, right? And so, and then the parable of vineyards, where the leadership, it is a strong indictment of the leadership. And this is the culmination of that, because just like in the exile, when they trusted in the temple to be their safety, and yet God allowed it to fall and allowed that destruction to happen, all of that is coming again. Mm-hmm. And so, and it's because they're not being faithful. What does it mean to be faithful to God? And so that sense of, the widow, we get a tiny little glimpse of what it means to be faithful. And the church will see, like, this was headed our way even back when Jesus was teaching. He knew it. He said it. So how are we going to lead? How are we the new Israel? How can we be different than the leaders of Israel who were failing the people this whole time? And that's Jesus' comments of them.
Yeah, that is so great and so right and so important to this text, because it comes down to that. What does it mean to be faithful in these times of crisis? What does it actually look like? What are we correcting that went wrong before? And by the way, Michael, just great teaching instincts to seek out the thoughtful introvert. who's quietly thinking brilliant things, and you're just, hey, you say something. I love that.
Introvert, no, she always has great comments when you're talking about.
Yeah, but she's not going to raise her hand. You have to. I have all sorts of students like that. This is why that story at the beginning is important, and not just a random bit of insert at the beginning. I'm sure there are lots of problems within Israel. They are addressed in Luke, but one of the ones that keeps coming up over and over again is not a critique of the wealthy. It's a critique of the wealthy that use their means in bad ways, that participate and even create a system that creates the circumstances where a poor widow has to give 2 mites or feels like she needs to give 2 mites, but nobody else is sort of living up to that sort of standard. Oh, yes, go on.
Okay. Sorry, didn't want to disturb.
No, you're great. I'm just rambling.
I really like one of the references that she made right now. Essentially, how the temple is meant to be like the place where they feel secured and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was thinking about it as she was saying it too. Just essentially how then Jesus says, "Oh, it's gonna be torn down," you know.
Mm-hmm.
But my question was, that wasn't it. I was just, what exactly is he referencing? Like, what time is it that he's referencing?
So,
I
yeah.
always took it as like his signs of his second coming, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, so the answer is yes. But that's a great question. So the Great Temple, which is technically the second version of it, there was the original temple. It was built and lasted until Jerusalem was sacked, long time before this. And they built it again. They said, we're going to do it again. So they built it even better. As you can see, they're like talking about what great, beautiful stones and architecture we have created here. And then in 70 CE, AD, whatever you want to call it, the Romans come in and sack Jerusalem again and destroy it. So Jesus is riding around or talking around late 20s, early 30s, depending on when you put his birth. And Luke is writing, probably recording all of this, finally around 80 or 90. So long time after, and the temple had already been destroyed at this point. Jesus is sort of speaking in the tradition of the prophets, to get to the second half of your question, who sort of have something like foresight, but a lot of scholars, I like what they have to say, because they call it insight, really, and it's just being able to say, like, we've seen this before, this is a pattern, this is going to fall, right? Jesus is no fool. He understands politics, he understands what's happening, and he's saying, like, hey, this is a part of a pattern we've seen before. The leadership especially becomes corrupt. There's exploitation and injustice everywhere, and God is not going to let this stand forever. So whether he knows the future or is just speaking with some great insight here is sort of not even the point. He's talking about literally an event historically that's going to happen in the future. But if we were to read the rest of the section, which we do not have time for, we would also actually see him making references to like standing before the Son of Man and these sorts of things. And I think we do actually catch one. Stand firm and you will win life, not a hair of your head will perish. We sort of catch these references to perhaps some sort of second coming, kind of event that's going to happen, some grand scheme much further away, even after the destruction of the temple. So to answer your question, historically, he's talking about the destruction of the temple in 70 CE, and theologically, he's speaking about basically all endings of great systems and the revitalization of the world. Did you have a follow-up?
I guess, why do you think he also felt the need to bring that specific event up in his, like, why specifically talk about the falling of the temple?
Because of its symbolic significance for the community. This is the center of religious life. It is the very manifestation of God being present among them. And I think that there's some just obvious irony when you have, like, has anyone ever been to the Vatican? You ever notice the homeless at the Vatican? You've been to the Vatican, right? Homeless there. Yeah. The first thing you told me about was the homeless that sleep like right near some of the cathedrals, some of the incredibly, ornate and beautiful things. And if we look at that sort of picture, we have someone who is in desperate need, and it's more complicated than this. A lot of us here have worked with the homeless. It's not as easy as give them money and that'll fix it. But there's sort of irony when you see like all this wealth and all this power and all this stuff here, and yet you still have so much inequality and so much injustice happening, so much lack of true religion, as James would put it, which is much more about taking care of one another and making sure everyone's needs are met, and respect and kindness for one another, over than building big buildings with fancy stones. Yes.
I keep going back to the widow and the way she gave her mites, and the Sadducees and Pharisees and scribes, and the way they gave their however much they gave. She quietly comes up to the giving box and drops her 2 coins in and leaves, scurries away, almost embarrassed that she cannot do more. And yet these other folks are up there saying, look how much I'm giving. Aren't I wonderful? So I think it all goes back to our attitude about the way we react to Christ and the way we live our lives and portray ourselves to the people around us.
Yeah, absolutely. And that really goes to show the different way that Jesus saw, right? Because just as you said, that probably was a regular occurrence. She probably did this not just once, but frequently, and was probably never seen. Whereas everyone else is so intent on being seen. We talk about social media and the way it makes us just all narcissists, but like this is a perennial human trait, right? That inclination towards wanting that power and prestige. Everyone else wanted to be seen. Jesus goes to the point, and Luke goes to the point of painting them in the light of people who are there wearing long flowing robes and the most honor. And this is a woman that probably was never seen or acknowledged, except for she's immortalized now because Jesus saw her.
Yeah, people love to be recognized, recognition. There's an old adage I heard is that the greatest sound to a person's ears is the sound of his own name, right? So everybody likes to be recognized. It's not bad to be recognized, but it depends on what you're being recognized for and how you want to be recognized.
Yeah.
Like, so this might, the widow, the exact opposite. So it's about the attitude and the mindset.
Yeah. Well, it is 10:15. That's a great place to end it. I think I've mostly escaped saying stupid things, so we're done. Would everyone agree? Is that right?
Yep.
I'm the guest here. I don't know.
Thank you, Brandon. We appreciate it. Thanks.
All right. Feel free to study this.